Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's UX Speaker Series. Today you get a double presentation. So it's my pleasure to bring in two HCDE Masters alum. So Rajiv and Yuan. Rajiv Pennathur is a user experience researcher based in Seattle, currently working at Expedia. He graduated when we were back in the remote days in 2021, so he was reminiscing about the COVID days. So those of you who had to do other sorts of learning through there, he can relate to that. And Yuan graduated in 2017, and they are now both at Expedia. So Yuan is a seasoned user research professional dedicated to bridging the gap between businesses and organizations, and she's currently a senior manager of user research at Expedia. And they're going to do a little more background on them, so I won't read their whole bio, and I will hand things over to Rajiv and Yuan. So here you go.
Thank you so much, Julie, for the intro. We are so happy to be here. Both Rajiv and I went to UW, the HCD program, and we love the campus, so it's lovely to be back. I'm going to introduce myself first. I know Julie mentioned I work as a senior manager at Expedia. Actually, 2 weeks ago, I switched back to an IC, so now I'm a senior user researcher at Expedia. I'm talking about changes. So I finished my master's in HCDE back in 2017. And before that, I worked at a law firm for about 3.5 years. And then before that, I was at UW doing my bachelor's in psychology. So it's been a long journey, and there's definitely ups and downs, which I'll share a little bit more in a minute.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Rajiv, and I'm a researcher at Expedia. I'm also an HCD alum, like Julie mentioned. I graduated in 2021. But before that, actually, a little bit about myself. I have a background in computer science and engineering. Did not enjoy it too much, so I switched careers from that to UX design. That was a lot of fun. I did enjoy UX design a lot. And then I got introduced to this field called UX research through some projects at my previous company, and that was even more interesting to me. So did a bit of that, and then came here 2019, did my master's in HCDE, and pivoted from design to research. And it's been a really fun journey working as a researcher, and like Yuan mentioned, lots of ups and downs. We'll talk a lot about that in this presentation. And it's always good to be back. So it's good to be here and talk at HCD again. And move on to the next slide.
Talking about changes today, we right now live in a world of rapid changes. I personally see changes in roughly two types. We have things that are more external. Think about, emerging technologies like AI. I'm sure nobody is unfamiliar with that and how that changes the workplace right now. There's also changes such as the shift in global markets, global economies, workplace norms that's evolving. For example, 6-7 years ago, you will probably never find the word hybrid on any job posting. But right now, that's very popular for tech companies that are hiring and highly desired as well. And then the other types of change, I see them more as personal milestones or personal changes. For example, moving to a new city, new country. Both Rajiv and I have moved from a different country to the US. Starting a family, having children, maybe changing career, having different roles at your job. These are all personal milestones and changes. I think what often happens is that these personal milestones and the external changes that we may be encountering tend to intersect each other, which can amplify these changes even more, and you feel it so intensely. And that's why we thought talking about changes today and how we have navigated some of those experiences can be helpful as a way to just, share personal experience and have a discussion about that.
Yeah, so when you and I were talking about reflecting on some of these major changes we've gone through, both personally and in our careers, we thought, the ways we've navigated these changes were kind of very closely aligned to a framework that all of us are quite familiar with. one that's rooted in human-centered design. And when we were asked to give this talk or give a talk at the speaker series, we figured that this would be quite an interesting topic to talk about because I'm sure everyone here is going through some sort of change in some way or the other. And yeah, we thought it'd be a good topic to talk about through some of our stories and personal experiences. And with that, we'll go over the goal of today's talk.
So we are going to talk about some personal changes that we have experienced and use those stories to help show you how you can use the double diamond process. Hopefully that's not new to anyone here. It's like a pop quiz. And together with skills and some mindsets so that you can show up as an impact player in order to navigate changes in life. I've underlined a few words. We're going to go into some of these in just a few minutes so that we can all be on the same page, set some context before we go dive even more. So just a quick refresher of the double diamond process. The way I see this, if I am to explain this to my 7-year-old, is I would say the double diamond is a way of thinking and problem solving. Essentially, what you're trying to do is understand the problem before you create solutions. To me, that's the core of double diamond. We put some names here for each of the stage. You may find other versions on the internet that use slightly different words, but the idea is the same. In the first diamond, you are understand problem. And I use the word problem not to say something is wrong. I just mean the space, the situation. Maybe it's traveler needs, customer needs, pain points, whatever that space that you're trying to explore. And then the second phase or second diamond, that's where you are exploring and figuring out solutions. But the core of this is understand problem before you create solution.
And the other thing that were highlighted was skills and mindsets. So on a very high level, right, skills are basically like these practical, measurable, and observable abilities that all of us can apply as we're going through changes, right? And some of the common skills that all of us are familiar with, being in HCDE, prototyping, conducting user interviews, testing, iterating, all these are different skills that all of us are familiar with, right? Mindsets, on the other hand, are sort of these attitudes that how you show up when you are dealing through these different changes. And again, some of the common mindsets that all of us are maybe familiar with is, having curiosity, having empathy for our customers. And in a way, I kind of see this as the same, two sides of the same coin, because they kind of influence one another. And skills can be looked at something that can get you, to the door, but mindset sort of determines how far you can go, right? For example, in the sports analogy, you could have all the talent and all the skills to be this amazing player, but unless you have that hard work and like the work ethic, that growth mindset, you won't be able to go too far, right? So that's how I look at skills and mindsets. And I want to talk about this element of impact players, right? Who are impact players? And actually, this is purely influenced by a book I read titled Impact Players. And when I was reading this book, what I saw was some of the ways that impact players presented themselves at the times of uncertainty. I thought that was the right type of mindset we should have when we approach these kind of changes of experiencing or going through changes in both our careers and lives. So who are impact players, right? So these are players who are people who are consistently, they step up in messy and ambiguous situations. They take ownership of important but undefined problems. They adapt quickly when things go wrong, and they try to do their best to deliver meaningful outcomes to elevate the people, the team, the environment around them. So yeah, as we go through these different phases of the double diamond process, we'll showcase the contrasting mindsets of impact players versus typical contributors, and also showcase like the skills and skills, mindsets, and how they sort of showcase themselves, so like how they show up during these times of change. And I'll hand it over back to Yuan for the first phase.
All right, now we have set the stage. Let's go into details of each phase and share some personal stories of the skills and mindsets that we leveraged in order to show up as impact players. I'm not saying we're always impact players. There are definitely times we just want to, chill and be a typical contributor. But you get my point. I want to first share my story in this immerse phase. So we talked about immerse, this is where you are exploring option or exploring understanding the space. Back when I was working at the law firm in 2014, this was my job right after college, and I worked there for about 2 years. I got really comfortable because we had hundreds of cases each year. And I was working as legal assistant / client relationship coordinator / technical translator / sometimes chaperone for my boss's kids. So because we had hundreds of cases each year, and I had a great manager, so much practice working on this immigration stuff, I got really comfortable and honestly pretty good at my job. But then 2 years in, I started to wonder, is this what I want to do? Wearing multiple hats and not really having work-life balance. I enjoyed working there, but I also started to have some, ideas about, do I want to keep doing this for the next 5 years of my life? So, of course, being at a law firm, going to law school seemed like the most obvious and easiest option. I had all these lawyers in the office who kept on telling me, oh, you should go to law school, keep your day job here and go to law school at night. In a few years, you will end up with a student debt and a law degree, and you became, a lawyer here. I thought that could be an option, but I was also wondering, what else can I do? What are the things that I am interested in? What are my passion and motivation? So I thought I could take some time and explore a little bit more. I mentioned that sometimes I'm a chaperone for my boss's kid. And one day I drove the child to this place called Children's Institute for Learning Differences. And I met this occupational therapist there who is amazing. I never know that children could go to occupational therapists because I always thought that's for adults. So through my interaction with this therapist, I realized, oh wow, this is a thing. You could do really cool stuff as an occupational therapist with children. So I told her, can I volunteer on the weekend? And she said, sure, try this out and see, what you think. Then I also looked into what would it take to become an occupational therapist? Of course, it takes a master's degree. So I signed up for a class, Human Anatomy and Physiology at a community college, because that's one of the prerequisites. I also did some research online because I have a psychology background, and I thought, what can someone do with this? That's not a therapist. And human ergonomics or human factor engineer came up in the search. And this was also around the time that one of the clients' case that I worked on was about this employer sponsoring a work visa for their employee. And the job title said UX designer. I had no idea what's UX designer. I know about visual design, but I never heard of user research at that time. So I looked it up and I thought this could be interesting. And I asked my then boyfriend, now husband, because he works at Microsoft. I said, do you know anyone who's a UX designer? He's like, oh, I think there's someone at my floor that's a UX designer. So he connected me with this person. We had a coffee chat. It turned out that person is not a UX designer at all. She's a UX researcher. But it was such a helpful conversation because she helped me realize someone with a psychology degree could go work at a corporate world as a researcher. So this was at the point I realized, okay, maybe I could, do a little bit more exploration for this UX field. I remember another thing I tried was joining the Microsoft hackathon. We had friends who work at Microsoft and doing a hackathon. And I said, do you think I can just tag along as someone not working there, but help you out on some UX aspect? I had no knowledge about UX. He's a developer, and he said, sure, I can use some help. So it was experiences like that really helped me. What do I really want to do? And if we reflect on that experience that I just shared, I was asking questions, asking people questions, asking myself questions. I was observing without trying to fix. I had this job and I was okay with it, but I also wanted to try different things. I was definitely more curious over decision making. Obviously, everyone's situation is different. Maybe you have a deadline. With my situation back then, I didn't have a deadline to quit that job, so I took my time to explore. And I had empathy. I thought empathy was an interesting mindset that I should talk about as well. I guess in my case, I'm the user, I'm the stakeholder. So empathy is more for myself. Things like self-acceptance, self-discovery. I realized in that exploration phase that there are things that I'm just not very interested in, like human anatomy and physiology. I tried really hard and couldn't get a B+ in that class. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay to realize that there are just certain things that I am not interested in, and that's who I am. And going back to the typical contributor and impact player analogy or reference that Rajiv was talking about, in a phase like immerse, when you are exploring options, a typical contributor may think, tell me what the problem is. Tell me what my job should be next. Tell me, how I should do this. But an impact player may think, I am going to spend some time and go understand what's really going on so that I can have the more clarity in order to make informed decisions. And now we can move on to the next phase.
Thank you, Yuan. And we're doing a dry run about this yesterday, and it was really funny and interesting to hear so many things about your career. We'll move on to the second phase of the double diamond process, which is the frame phase. And this is where I guess we can talk about defining the problem that truly needs to be solved. I have a little more of a sad example compared to Yuan, but Expedia recently underwent major changes. We had to lay off a bunch of different people, and this was especially hard for me because I didn't lose just people like colleagues. I lost my manager, my research partner, and friends who I'd made through work, and these really close people who I'd worked with in the past. And they weren't just smart coworkers. They were people I trusted, people I learned from quite a bit, built some great products with. And when this happened, I was quite shocked. I was really sad, very demotivated. And those initial days, I could barely get any work done. Everything felt like 2-3x slower, and it just did not feel like working. And part of me was also quite angry because, like I said, these were incredibly talented people. And it was quite hard to make sense of why they were let go. I kept asking myself, why did this happen? Why wasn't it me? Or why was it them? How am I supposed to continue working without them? After sitting with these emotions for for some time, I soon came to the realization that the company is not going to stop running, right? The work is not going to stop. Our research roadmap is not going to pause because it's waiting for me to process my feelings. And I knew I couldn't control what had just happened, why the layoffs happened, all of that stuff. But what I knew was I could control how I would show up and what I could do next. That's something I can control. And that's where the frame phase of the double diamond process becomes real, because it's not just a design exercise, it's also a life skill. And that initial problem, right? Why did this happen? How am I supposed to What am I supposed to do without them? That kind of framing, I realize that keeps you kind of stuck. So I asked myself a different question. Like, given this happened, it's really sad. It's it's shocking. I feel angry. But given this has already happened, what is the problem that actually needs to be solved now, right? And when I stepped back, the real challenge was, we were one researcher short. Our original roadmap was planned for 2 researchers, and we had this super long list of research priorities. So the real problem was, okay, like how might we create meaningful research impact in this quarter with half the research capacity? So what I did was, now I was able to compartmentalize my emotions and set that part aside, focusing on the real problem, focusing on this problem, I guess. So reach out to different stakeholders, try to understand, because even all of them had gone through something similar, had lost their colleagues, lost their friends. So what was the impact on these changes on their roadmaps, right? What were their priorities now, given these changes happen? And we had this long list of research initiatives, but now what's the most important thing to tackle? So I started working on these updated initiatives, updated roadmap, based on these changes that were happening. And tying it back to the skills and the mindsets, right? The skills that really helped me, again, going back to some of the things that we are learning in HCDE, is problem framing under constraints. Like I had to figure out, okay, these are all the different problems, but what's the actual problem that needs to be solved for now? And stakeholder collaboration, trying to work with my stakeholders, figure out this is what the changes, these are the impact of the changes, what's next for this, how does it impact their work, how does it impact my research work? And prioritization, now that we know these are the different changes, what's the most important thing for us to tackle? So these are all the skills that we're all learning right now in HCDE. And the mindset, this was a real change, I guess, a real shift in terms of trying to make sense of all this. Focusing on what you can control. It's quite hard because there's so many, it's quite emotional, going through all these big impacts and losing people. But realizing what is happening and what you can actually control is quite important here. And ownership, because I knew I was the only person in the research org in this particular space in Verbo who knew the space best. So I knew that this was where I could take control and help sort of drive some of the initiatives and what we could do in the quarter, given half the capacity. And I know I mentioned impact over emotion, but I don't want to suppress the emotional side of this because, like I said, it is quite hard to go through all of this, but it did require a bit of separating the emotional side and then what's impactful here. So I allowed myself some time to sit through my emotions, go through all of that, go through all that grief, but also I knew that I could be sad, but at the same time, I can still be impactful. And this is where, again, going back to the impact players, right? How does a typical contributor and impact player show up quite clearly here is, again, focusing on, there's a lot of distraction going on, that is true. And it's very common for us to focus on that. But I guess where impact players kind of stand out is, okay, this is all that's happening, but now how can I identify ways to be more useful, more helpful, and more productive for the team? And this is where I think impact players do and see themselves as a chance to be more useful. Now we'll move on to the third phase of the double diamond process, which is ideate. And this is where we explore possibilities without pressure. And I want to go back a couple of years to when I was graduating HCDE. And back then looking for UX positions was quite hard. It was very competitive, and I'm sure many of you are experiencing something very similar to that right now, thousands of people looking for UX positions, and all of them having very similar backgrounds, very similar skill sets. So going through that entire exercise, my problem framing here was, okay, how do I differentiate myself? How do I make myself stand out in this very crowded UX research job market? And this is where I want to bring the ideate phase of the double diamond process into focus here. It's a good way to ideate on ways to differentiate myself and things I did, right? And I started to think to myself, okay, like what are the different approaches I can take to showcase my different skills, to make myself stand out. And there are different ways to do this, but a couple of things I want to highlight here is how I approached trying to look at different resumes, portfolios, websites. With resumes, I remember I think I had about 75 to 80 different iterations of the resumes, trying to figure out if the single column layout worked best, the double column layout, should I include my design background, how much content should I include in my resume, stuff like that. And would this particular version work well with that, the resume tracking system and all of that stuff. So a lot of ideation on figuring out what the best resume format was. And websites, I think right now it's more common for researchers to have websites, but back then it wasn't the case. I was debating, all these designers have these really fun and really cool looking websites. Is that something I should be doing? Should I create a UX research website to kind of showcase myself? And if I do that, again, what's the value there? Should I showcase, because designers could showcase their wireframes, their animations and all of that, but what does a researcher showcase, right? Maybe my research process, is that interesting enough? Do I showcase something about myself? Because a lot of people were talking about how culture fit was important. So I maybe showcase more about how I come across as a person, the things I like to do. So trying all these different things. And even cover letters, how I reached out to different people on LinkedIn. All of these things required a lot of ideation and iteration. And it wasn't because I had so many these ideation and iteration, not because I was indecisive, but I just wanted to explore different ways of fine-tuning and trying to improve all these different things. And every single one of these iterations were in some ways guided to some hypothesis. Like I mentioned, the single column or two column layout. Does it make more sense for this to will work well with a resume software, resume tracking software? Does having a portfolio of a website make it more eye-catching to recruiters? These are all different hypotheses I wanted to test and get some answers on. And yeah, I remember back in the day, me and my friend would just set up these different long working sessions, trying to get feedback as well. We just work on something, iterate, and just hey, this makes sense. What feedback do you have? And I would go back. I also go to the career center, get feedback on my resume. So that feedback loop is also a very big and important process in this. And I did receive a lot of critical feedback, lots of things that I was told could change this and this way could improve. But I knew all of this was going to be helpful because in a way you kind of carve out what is the best experience or what's the best way I can showcase myself. And by fine-tuning and refining, I knew I could find that silver bullet to sort of find the job I was looking for. And yeah, going back to the skills and mindsets approach, the skills that help me, again, things which we actually learn in HCDE, right? Continuous hypothesis-driven iteration, learning from feedback loops. We're trying to set different feedback loops across the design or research process to get that feedback. And refining based on data, maybe work on this version of the resume, apply for a job, doesn't work out, you kind of get some feedback based on that, right? So that's kind of critical there. And the mindset that helped me, yeah, iteration without ego, and viewing rejection as data and not failure. I can't count the number of times I got emails saying that, hey, thanks for applying for this position, but we no longer are interested, or we find someone else who could better suit the role or whatever. But it was hard, I'm not denying that. But again, trying to view it as a data point. Okay, maybe something I did wasn't right. Maybe I could fine tune my resume. Maybe I could update my portfolio to reflect something else. So viewing rejection as data and not failure is very important here. And I want to end this by talking about how typical contributors and impact players present themselves. And I do want to acknowledge that it is a really difficult market right now. And there are so many different candidates, there's so many talented people, and there are not a lot of roles out there. And an impact player is not denying these constraints. Yeah, there's so many people, not as many jobs out there. But what really differentiates themselves is, yes, it's very competitive. There's probably not much I can do, but okay, given that the market is hard. How do I show up, right? How they start to think about how do they adapt their ways of approach, their styles to this competitive landscape. And yeah, that's a little bit about the impact players approach. And the third phrase is ideate. I'll hand back to Yuan, who'll talk about the final phrase, that is the phrase, execute.
Thank you, Rajiv. I thought that example that you shared with ideate is so timely. I love it. We'll end with something a little bit more lighthearted with the last phase, execute. This is where after you have come up with different solutions, ideas, you are trying to prioritize, you try different of those ideas, you may have learnings, and then you adapt your ideas. So a couple of years ago, when COVID ended, Expedia told us, now you have to come back to work 3 days a week. And this was a big change for me because I got so comfortable working at home. And also Expedia moved to in the Interbay area that's next to the cruise terminal. And that's a much longer commute for me compared to when it was in the Bellevue headquarters a few years back. So I felt like I had two big changes that I had to navigate. Number one, how do I get to work? And number two, what do I do during that long commute? So I started out with a spreadsheet that you can see on the left corner talking about research. I mapped out a few different options for myself, ideated. Then I started to execute. I compared the average commute time for each of the route. And some of those options were ruled out immediately because they were just taking way too long. And then I eventually ended up with one of the options that I stick with right now. So that solved my how do I get to work. But then what do I do for that 1 hour, 15 minutes one way? I tried different things. I tried working on the shuttle. That was so bad because within 5 minutes I started to feel nauseous. I tried stretching. That picture is not me, by the way. But, imagine like me sitting there trying to roll my neck and shrug my shoulder. That didn't work very well because I often have someone sitting next to me, trying to work on their laptop and looking at me. Not judging. I'm sure they're not judging. I also tried journaling. I thought, at the end of the day, I'll write down my work thoughts or life thoughts. That didn't go very well either because sometimes the shuttle is like a kid version roller coaster. So writing journal wasn't great. But there were a few other things that I tried that worked pretty well. Guided meditation. I know that picture looks very zen, but it's not great. But guided meditation really helps. It just gives me a much more positive mindset to go to work and end my day with. Classical music. I'm a big fan of classical music. And because of my long commute, I get to try different composers that I normally would not listen to. And audiobooks. Now that seemed like a pretty obvious option as well. So, with my execution phase, I've tried different things. Some worked, some didn't. And I kept on iterating. For example, now I do this thing where each week I come up with a theme for myself for what I'm going to listen to. So let's say, February or March, it may be spring related. So I'll find spring related classical music, spring related books, just to keep things fresh. So yeah, testing out different options and you learn and you move on from there. In summary, the skills and mindsets that helped me to figure out my commute option are things like trial, learn, and adjust. I spent quite a lot of time to reflect on what worked and what didn't work and make changes from there. The third bullet point may be less relevant for my situation, but I think it's very relevant if you're working with a team of people in real life projects. Because when you're narrowing down your solutions, you want to be a good storyteller. You want to influence people about why you're choosing to prioritize certain things and drop the others. And I had a very strong bias towards action. If I come up with a new idea, I would go execute, adapt, and then try again. progress over perfection. I thought this is really important because I probably will never have a perfect commute. Like, let's be honest, 1 hour, 15 minute one way is not going to be enjoyable. However, if I can make my commute less frustrating, I think that's progress, and I value that way more than perfection. And with that, let's also talk about, what a typical contributor might think in this phase. They may come up with some solutions and think, okay, I'm done here. This project is over. But an impact player may think, here's some things that I have tried, and this is what I learned, and this is how I'm going to improve. So think about different mindsets and how you can apply those things to problems and changes in your own life as well.
Okay, quick summary of everything. Navigating changes. What we showcased here, right, was using a framework that we're all familiar with, and how we can navigate changes through this HCD framework, leveraging the skills and mindsets, and to show up as an impact player. One thing which we're all very familiar with, being in the UX field or HCD field, is everything, it depends. I want to mention, everyone has a very unique skill set and a unique mindset, and these examples are just things that worked well for us in our unique situations. So I'm sure all of you might have a different sort of combination of skills and mindset that you might want to apply for your different changing situations. And also I think Yuan mentioned this early on, is the examples we have are examples of how we showed up as an impact player, but it's not always the case. It's hard to have that consistent impact player sort of mindset. So we've always been through phases where we've shown up more as a typical contributor and not an impact player. But yeah, ultimately finding what works well for you and your situation is critical. And also keep that framework flexible. Again, we showed you the double diamond, the 4 different triangles, but not all problems require going through all the 4 phases. Sometimes it might require just maybe 1 triangle, maybe 5 triangles, maybe add another diamond to it. So it just changes. So always trying to figure out what works well for you and your situation. So use that framework as more of a foundation instead of a prescription. And like I mentioned, that book, Impact Players, is such a really, really good book. And this is actually a table from that book in terms of how impact players and typical contributors show up, right? So let's take some examples of messy problems. Impact players look at that as a chance to be useful. You showed some examples of that. Unclear rules, it's when they can show up to provide leadership versus looking for leadership. When things go wrong, there's unforeseen obstacles. Instead of seeing that as a added hassle, it's a chance to do it a better way. Again, when things are changing, they're moving targets, it might seem as, okay, maybe I don't have the skills or strengths to work on this. It's a chance to maybe learn and build new capabilities. And when there are unrelenting demands, it's instead of a reason to ask for help, it could be a chance for all of us to work together and work on something really, really fun and impactful. So highly recommend reading that book. It's really, really good. And back to Yuan to close us off with this talk.
Yeah, before we close and have Q&A, we just want to end by saying that everything that you're learning during HCDE or in other departments, it's not just skills and mindsets or frameworks to help you find jobs, not just about your career. In our opinion, those are life skills. It's a way of thinking. These are ways to help you navigate changes, go through stress and anxiety with some ease, and making sense of uncertainty or ambiguity in both life and work. So after all, what we're learning here are life skills, just like swimming. With that, if anyone has questions, we are more than happy to answer.